It weighs about the same as a grapefruit and is made mostly of fat and water. It makes up about 2% of your body mass, yet consumes about 20% of your calories. It takes 25 years to grow. Zombies love them. We wish politicians had more of them.
Why am I here?
I don't know who created Pokemon Go.
Today we're talking about
I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully.
the brain.
To the brain! The brain! To the brain! The brain!
I like to play games.
Psychology. Made simple.
If you were to take a look at a human brain, it's not what you'd call Instagram ready. It's grey, wrinkly, kind of slimy. But beneath all that lies 500 million years of evolution. I'm a neurospicy psych major on the long road to PhD. You can call me Dex. And this 30,000 foot view is the first in an occasional series looking at what goes on between our ears, the brain. If you could trace your brain's history back, you wouldn't stop at early humans or even the first mammals. You'd go much farther, past the reptiles, past the fish, all the way back to creatures that didn't even have heads. The human brain is the end result of more than 500 million years of improvisation, layer upon layer of evolutionary tinkering that turns simple reflexes into emotion, memory, and thought. Our journey begins way back in the mists of time, 500 million years, in the Cambrian period. The earliest nervous systems appeared in simple invertebrates like jellyfish, comb jellies, and other ancient ocean life. These creatures didn't have brains, they had what's called a nerve net, a loose, web-like network of neurons that could sense and respond to their environment but couldn't think or plan. Over millions of years, some of these nerve cells began to cluster into small control centers called ganglia, handling simple tasks like movement or feeding. Eventually, those clusters start to form at the front of the body, where sensory organs are located. That front-end concentration of neurons eventually became the ancestor of every brain that followed. As vertebrates appeared around 500 million years ago, those nerve clusters transformed into something much more organized. The front of the neural tube, the early brain, divided into 3 bulges. These became the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. The hindbrain took charge of the most vital tasks, things like breathing, heartbeat, and balance. The midbrain handled sensory processing, sight and sound. And the forebrain, which originally specialized in smell, slowly took on a wider role in decision making and coordination. By the time the first fish and amphibians appeared, the basic blueprint of every vertebrate brain was already in place. Around 400 million years ago, evolution began refining the base of this system, what's often called the reptilian complex. This ancient core, which we share with reptiles and birds today, includes the brainstem and the cerebellum. The brainstem, made up of the midbrain, the pons and medulla oblongata, we'll talk about these later, they keep us alive. It regulates breathing, heart rate and reflexes without needing permission from the conscious mind. Nestled just behind the brainstem is the cerebellum. The cerebellum added coordination and precision, allowing early animals to swim, run, or fly with balance and control. Together, these structures made survival automatic, managing the basics of life long before thought or emotion even existed. Then about 250 million years ago, something remarkable happened with the rise of the mammals. Around that ancient core grew a new set of structures known as the limbic system, the emotional brain. This addition transformed life from purely reactive to genuinely feeling. The amygdala began to process fear, anger, and pleasure. The hippocampus learned to store memories of past experiences. The hypothalamus connected the brain to the body's hormones, regulating hunger, sleep, and stress. For the first time, animals could learn from experience, care for their young, and form social bonds. Emotion had entered the evolutionary story, and with it came empathy and parental care. not to mention complex behaviours. From there, evolution added the next layer that would ultimately define us, the crown jewel of human evolution, the neocortex. This is the wrinkled outer shell of the brain, and it first appeared around 200 million years ago in small mammals, but in primates and especially in humans, it exploded in size. The neocortex gave rise to flexible thinking, planning, and imagination. It's here that conscious awareness lives, the ability not just to react, but to reflect. The cortex itself is divided into regions or lobes, each with a specialized role. At the front is, unsurprisingly, the frontal lobe, where decisions are made, plans are formed, and impulses are controlled. The prefrontal cortex, the very front of this region, is often called the seat of personality. When this area of the brain is damaged, as it was in the famous case of Phineas Gage, his rational and social behaviour changed dramatically. Attend any Psych 101 class, and there's a very good chance you're going to study the areas of the brain. And if you do study the areas of the brain, there's a 100% chance that you're going to look at the fascinating and pretty gross story of Phineas Gage. So the TLDR, I'll try and keep it as family friendly as possible, is 25, I think he was, year-old Gage was working on the railroads just outside Vermont in 1848. He accidentally detonated some explosives with a 3.5 foot long steel bar. The bar shot out of his hand, entered his head just behind the cheekbone here, took out his left eye, and exited through the top of his head just behind the frontal lobe. The steel bar was found later a few yards behind, covered in blood and brain tissue. And as shocking as that might be, turns out Gage was a bit of a unit. Not only did he survive the accident, he remained conscious, was able to walk a little distance to find some help. His co-workers bundled him into a wagon and took him into town where he could see a doctor. And although Dr. John Harlow did a bang-up job of cleaning out and removing bits of skull fragments from the wound, as well as fighting off several serious infections, once Phineas had made a recovery, his family and friends couldn't help but notice that he was somehow changed. Before the accident, he was diligent, hard-working, responsible, well-liked. After the accident, he became unreliable, had trouble with impulse control, had great difficulty in forward planning and managing social situations. So he lived for another 12 years, couldn't really hold down a job, so he took whatever work he could find. I think he was with the Barnum and Bailey Circus for a little while, even got a job as a stagecoach driver in Chile. But as time went by, Phineas developed epilepsy, and it was a seizure that finally took his life. But the story of Phineas Gage told us two things. Firstly, it clearly demonstrated that different areas of the brain handle different functions. In his case, the prefrontal cortex there, an executive function. And secondly, it demonstrated the remarkable capacity for the brain to reorganize and compensate for certain deficits, what we now call neuroplasticity. Behind that lies the parietal lobe, which gives us a sense of space and touch, the awareness of where our body is in relation to the world. The temporal lobe, near the sides, handles hearing, language, and long-term memory. And at the back sits the occipital lobe, processing everything we see, every colour, shape, and motion. The neocortex brought all these regions together into a coordinated system of higher thought, allowing language, abstract reasoning, and creativity to emerge. Meanwhile, the brain was also dividing its workload between two hemispheres. The left hemisphere took on more analytical and linguistic duties, while the right handled spatial and emotional processing. The two halves communicate constantly through what's called the corpus callosum, a thick bridge of fibers connecting both halves of your brain. Now, despite popular myths about people being left-brained and right-brained, the truth is that both sides are always working, balancing logic and intuition and emotion. By the time early humans arrived, the brain had tripled in size compared to our primate ancestors. But none of the older systems disappeared. The brainstem still manages our breathing and heartbeat. The limbic system still colours our experience with emotion. And the cortex still builds on top of it all, interpreting, reasoning, and imagining. Every decision you make, every feeling you have, is the product of these layers working together. ancient survival instincts, emotional drives, and conscious reflection, all in constant conversation. When you act on an impulse, that's your old reptilian circuitry speaking. When you feel empathy or nostalgia, that's the mammalian limbic system. And when you plan for the future, question your choices, or tell stories, that's your neocortex at work. Evolution didn't build a new brain from scratch, it kept renovating the old one, turning instinct into emotion and emotion into thought. So when we talk about the modern human brain, what we really mean is a biological time machine, a living museum of evolution. The instincts that kept ancient fish alive still keep your heart beating. The emotional circuits that bonded early mammals still shape our relationships. And the cortex that allowed our ancestors to plan the hunt is now the same one we use to plan our vacations. From drifting nerve nets to self-awareness, from reflex to reflection, the human brain tells the story of life learning to know itself. 500 million years of history, all happening inside your head. Don't know if you can hear that noise, that's some workers outside. Sorry about that. So that's our introduction to the human brain. If you have any questions or thoughts, let me know in the comments below. Our next journey into the brain is going to take us deeper, literally, as we look at what happens inside the head at the microscopic level. And if you found this episode interesting, I think you're going to really like this episode, where we discuss the possible links between violence in the media, and video games in particular, and real-world violence. Gets a bit controversial.
Please like and subscribe, you legend.